Red Bull just got exposed, and this time, there's nowhere to hide. The FIA has the data. The numbers are clear. And what they found explains why Max Verstappen is over 1 second off the pace in Suzuka. Not tenths. Not small margins. Over a full second. After upgrades. After adjustments. After everything. And here's the part that should worry you. He's not fighting for pole anymore. He's fighting to stay in the top 10. Beaten by midfield cars. Falling behind every session. This is not a bad day. This is a pattern. Because the FIA has now confirmed a hidden issue inside the RB22. One that affects performance, reliability, and even how the car behaves at high speed. And once you understand what's really happening, you realize this isn't just a Japan problem. This could define Red Bull's entire season. Stay with me, because the real reason behind this collapse is much worse than anyone expected. At first, it didn't look like a collapse. That's what made it so easy to miss. Red Bull came into Suzuka with urgency. Not panic, but urgency. They knew something wasn't working. Bahrain had warning signs. China made it worse. But Japan was supposed to be the reset. New parts. New direction. A chance to fix everything before it got out of control. And for a moment, it almost looked believable. The car went out in FP1. Verstappen pushed. Clean laps. No major mistakes. Nothing dramatic. But then you look at the timing screen. And something feels off. 7th place. Not terrible. But not Red Bull. And then you see the gap. Nearly 8 tenths to the fastest car. That's not a small miss. That's a warning. And here's where people made the first mistake. They assumed it was just the session. Track conditions. Low grip. Different programs. All the usual excuses. But that's not what the data was showing. Because even in that early phase, Red Bull wasn't just slower. They were disconnected. The front wasn't fully responding. The rear wasn't fully stable. And through Suzuka's most important section, the high-speed flow, the car didn't look natural. It looked forced. And that's something you can't hide for long. Because Suzuka is not a track where you can fake performance. Every corner builds into the next. Every mistake compounds. Every weakness gets amplified. So if the car isn't perfectly balanced, you don't just lose time. You lose confidence. And when a driver like Verstappen starts losing confidence, that's when you know the problem is real. But here's where things take a turn. Because FP1 was only the beginning. The real picture starts to appear later. When conditions improve. When grip increases. When everyone pushes closer to the limit. That's when the truth comes out. And for Red Bull, that truth was much worse than anyone expected. And this is where everything breaks. Because FP2 doesn't lie. The track is faster. Grip is higher. Conditions are stable. This is where real performance shows up. And Red Bull doesn't show up. Verstappen drops to 10th. Not fighting the leaders. Not even close to the top teams. He's in the middle of the pack. Behind cars that, just 1 season ago, wouldn't even be visible in his mirrors. And the gap? Over 1.3 seconds to the fastest lap. That's not a setup issue. That's not traffic. That's a completely different performance category. And here's where the situation becomes impossible to ignore. Because it's not just Verstappen. His teammate is even further back. 15th. Same car. Same package. Same problems. Which confirms one thing immediately. This is not about the driver. This is the car. And now the pattern is undeniable. Every time the track improves, Red Bull falls further behind. Not closer. Further. And that detail changes everything. Because normally, when grip increases, top teams unlock more performance. They get faster, more stable, more predictable. Red Bull does the opposite. The more the track gives, the more the car takes away. And that tells you something is fundamentally wrong. Not with one part. Not with one setup decision. With how the entire car behaves at the limit. And this is where Suzuka becomes brutal. Because this circuit demands commitment. Flat-out sections. High-speed direction changes. Corners where you don't just drive. You trust. And the RB22 doesn't give that trust. You can see it in the onboard. Small corrections. Tiny hesitations. Moments where Verstappen isn't fully attacking. Not because he doesn't want to, but because he can't. Because the car won't allow it. And when that happens, lap time disappears instantly. But here's the detail that makes this even worse. It's not just cornering. It's not just balance. It's what happens between those corners. The acceleration phases. The moments where power should hit. Where the car should launch forward. Instead, it feels delayed. Inconsistent. Like the performance comes in waves. And this is exactly what the FIA data is pointing at. Not a constant loss. A fluctuating one. Moments where the car delivers. And moments where it simply doesn't. Which is far more dangerous. Because a slow car can be understood. A predictable car can be managed. But an inconsistent car breaks rhythm, breaks confidence, breaks performance. And now, everything Verstappen said earlier in the season starts to connect. The complaints, the frustration, the feeling that the car is not drivable at the limit. This is what he meant. Not that the car is slow everywhere, but that it cannot deliver performance when it matters most. And once you reach that point, you're no longer chasing speed. You're chasing control. And that's a completely different battle. Because instead of asking, how do we go faster? Red Bull is now asking, how do we make this car predictable? And that is a much harder problem to solve. Especially in the middle of a race weekend. Especially under pressure. And especially when the FIA data is already confirming that this issue is not going away anytime soon. And this is where the FIA confirmation becomes impossible to ignore. Because up to this point, you could still argue it was just performance. A bad setup. A difficult track. Something temporary. But the data says otherwise. The FIA didn't just look at lap times. They looked at how the car produces those lap times. Energy deployment. Thermal behavior. Power consistency. And what they found explains everything. Red Bull is not delivering power in a stable way. Not lap after lap. Not corner after corner. But in bursts. Short moments where the car feels alive. Followed by phases where it simply drops off. And this is critical. Because in modern Formula 1, consistency is everything. You don't just need power. You need uninterrupted power. Through the entire lap. And especially at Suzuka. That's non-negotiable. Long corners. Sustained throttle. You are constantly asking the car for energy. And if the system overheats, or cannot maintain output, you lose time in the worst possible places. Not on the straight, but before it. During acceleration. Right when performance matters most. And this connects directly to Red Bull's core issue. Cooling. The aggressive design. The tight packaging. It looked brilliant on paper. Minimal drag. Maximum efficiency. But in reality, it's restricting airflow. Not enough clean air reaching critical components, especially the ERS. And when that system gets too hot, the car has to protect itself. It reduces output. It limits deployment. And suddenly, you're not driving a full-power Formula One car anymore. You're driving a compromised one. This is exactly what happened in China. ERS overheating. Race over. And now in Suzuka. The same pattern is appearing again. Not as a failure, but as a limitation. A ceiling the car cannot break through. And here's where it gets even more dangerous. Because this doesn't just affect speed. It affects strategy. It affects racing. It affects everything. Drivers behind Red Bull will start to notice it. They will see where the car hesitates, where it stops accelerating properly, where it becomes vulnerable. And once that pattern is visible, it becomes predictable. And once it becomes predictable, it becomes attackable. This is no longer just a weakness. It's a target. And for the first time in years, Red Bull is the team others are planning to overtake, not defend against.